Ooh, thank you, Chase. Wow. How's it going?
That's your bio, not mine. It sounds so impressive when you just read it. What a career arc, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's always such a strange thing to hear that read back, and I'm like, wow, we did all that. Time is a funny thing. It's a lot of things happened in a decade.
Um, I think it was shocking to me just 120 seconds ago when we jumped on our connection here. I'm like, wow, how long has it been? And it was like you said, I think it was 2011, which is that freaked me out. So that's 9 years for those counting. In the woods in Tahoe, we got to spend some time together. I think it was Tim Ferriss that introduced us.
That's right.
Beautiful mutual friend of ours, and clearly you've been up to a lot since then. And I want to start at the start, which is there was a time before you were a professional musician where you were trying to figure out what it is that you wanted to do with your one precious life. And not that you have it figured out, but so many of our listeners are in a position right now where they've either followed a path that has led them astray or done the things that everybody else in the world wants them to do. And it's time that they start to focus on their own one precious life. And I'm trying to figure out, how did you figure out yours?
That's funny. As right as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, I think I'm still figuring it out, and every day I feel more and more like a student. I think, and I love the idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where actually at the very beginning of music, when I first started producing and Glitch Mob was making albums, I think that I had it more figured out at that point in time. And there's a point where I was like, okay, yeah, music's easy, I got this. But the more that I learned, the more that I realized that I didn't know. And now learning to me it's an integral part of the process of learning. I'm actually right now I'm taking music composition lessons. I am not classically trained by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I until recently I only knew anecdotal music theory. I just sort of hunt and peck and figure stuff out and basically smash the piano like an ape, and good sounds would come out. But there's something in actually the naivete of just going by vibe or what sounds good. So for me, in a way, I'm actually glad that I didn't know the specific rules of music theory, because now that I'm going back and learning it and combining it with my own internal compass,
Yeah.
it's really expanding from there. So I guess that's like on a high level, that's how everything got going.
Well, I think I want to pull on that string for a second. Do you think that's a better way of learning? Because obviously there is the classical train. You start with the rules and then you learn enough that you know how to break the rules and when. That tends to have a level of rigor and supervision, and I guess I'll throw it under all rules,
Yeah.
versus this feel, because it seems to me that so much of the thing that separates the world's top anything, creators, musicians, entrepreneurs, is their intuition and their gut. And I'm curious what your opinion is. Is there a better path of, learning to listen to your gut and then learning the rules? Because once you learn the rules, it's so hard to go back and listen to your gut. Or is the other way around more valuable, you think?
It's such an interesting question, and I think about this a lot. And what I've really come back to is everyone learns so differently. People self-educate in so many different ways. Where I have friends that are producers now. They're bands that travel around, and maybe they're like me. They just so happen to have learned themselves. Or there's other people that went to music school, and it really worked for them. But I think the thing that really distinguishes is just the mastery. It's the love of coming back day in and day out. And for me, I took one music theory class in school, and I was like, I couldn't handle it. It didn't even make sense to me. I didn't like it. I was like, I'm just going to go back to my computer and make weird sounds. But for some people, that really works. But at the point at which what really drove me to learn, and what ended up being more of a focus on, say, like sound design, because in electronic music, you can make music and not actually know how to play any instruments. So it's, Glitch Mob does have a lot of, so music theory, so to speak. Like there are chords in there are melodies. But at the end of the day, it is more about the way the music sounds in combination with that stuff. Although you can take some of that out. You could play the music on a piano, but even our performances live are not really about the fact that you watch us and you're like, wow, they're incredibly good at playing the guitar or the piano. Or some people you go watch, like when you watch videos of Prince play, who I've never actually got to see live, but that's someone where you not only is he a good musician, but he is one of the best guitar players of all time. And I think the cool thing about electronic music, and I don't want this to sound like I'm putting one above the other, because I really don't think so, is that it the tools are right there. It's so easy. You can go get a laptop, get some free sounds, and make an incredible album that really touches people. And that's, at the end of the day, that's really what matters.
I love the immediacy of that, the urgency, because let's face it, I think that most of the stuff that's keeping people from doing the things that they want to do in life is the talk track that they've got in their brain.
That's right.
And yeah, sure, there's plenty of practice, but even the talk track keeps them from practicing whatever it is, whether it's writing or music or, building a business or needlepoint or anything, having a family. And I'm curious what role, this is a soft way into mental health, because the most important words in the world are the ones we say to ourselves. And I'm curious is around in those early days, was there doubt? Was there fear? Or is that part of the beauty of being young and, as I think you said, naive early on? Is that helpful in some way? What was your earliest inner landscape like? If your outer landscape was like, cool, I'm making sounds, music theory is something I'll get to later, I just like the sounds that are coming out of my computer. What was that? If that's the outer landscape, what was your inner landscape?
Yeah, I mean, doubt and fear are an integral part of the process, and I even think that creative frustration of hearing something and not being able to create that, like those sorts of things can be something that drives you forward. But the inner critic thrives on comparison. Like if its fuel is comparing yourself to someone else, I think that, so when we started doing this, I mean, Glitch Mob started around 2006. So some of our first shows, 2007, 8, 9. This is right around the time when social media wasn't around, and so we were a band from MySpace time. This is gonna date me. This is so funny. People are like, MySpace, what's that? But around the time where you had to go to your computer and sit down to access the internet, until the fact that it was everywhere. And I think it's a lot easier to compare yourself to other people now. But there's this, I'm sure you're familiar with the Ira Glass speech, which I love, and I send people all the time. And just the idea that you can have good taste and listen to something, but then if you compare yourself to it, you're not doing yourself a favor to actually really have the time to the mastery to get there. But back then, before social media, back in those days, I felt like it was a little harder to compare yourself to it, because we had a scene of our musician friends. There were some people we connected with on the internet. But now, if you are living in a world where you are constantly comparing yourself to every other artist who's right next to you or ahead of you, it almost like those favorite artists of yours are living in the room. That's actually quite a bit harder. So I think that at that time there's a huge benefit in that there was this is an underground movement. It came from this underground scene in LA and San Francisco, and I wasn't sitting around comparing myself to others. So now I think that artists have to work extra hard to any sort of creative, to not sit there, because every person who's better than you, and there's always going to be someone way better than you, sitting there going, oh, you're not good enough. And that's just, it's fodder for the inner critic. So I deal with that all of the time, but I would say that at least the muscle of segmenting out creative time and learning how to use the amazing technology of social media and getting to share this stuff and have conversations like this is really, it's incredible, the fact that music and art can reach people so quickly. But I think you have to work harder to not feed that inner critic.
So it's an active process, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. It's, and in that way, it's similar to, I would say, meditation, or it's really like in the same way that when you're meditating, a thought comes in and then you come back to your breath. It's like, well, now I'm in the studio, I'm making music, a thought comes in that's I'm not as good as that guy. And then, okay, just back to the music. And then over time, the ability to focus, and not even just the comparison part, but even simply the fact that our attention has been trained to tick away every couple of seconds, I think is another type of meditation I've been thinking about, where the ability to sit down in the studio for 2 hours straight and just do that was something that when we first started, that's what we did all the time. It wasn't a big deal, but now it's
Culture
harder.
has changed. Yeah.
Culture has changed. Yeah.
Culture has literally changed and
Yes.
transformed in attention deficit world where people are paid, like literally paid, to drag your attention away from the thing that you're focused on at any given moment. That's their job. And, now that there's so much competition for your attention, the ability to keep it is clearly critical. I love that was just an epiphany for me when you're like that. It was a different world. And I think about my own development as an artist, and it was largely sort of an incubator. Like there wasn't a lot of other inputs.
Right.
And it was in 2004, 5, 6 where you're like, sure, there is a thing. I wrote a blog, but like the responses took days to come in. You published a blog and you're still getting comments like 3 weeks later on the same blog post, and versus 3 seconds later or 3 minutes, or and the ability, as you said, to compare yourself to your neighbor was dramatically different. That was so simple, but it's just a reminder that is and nowadays, in order to protect that, it's you have to deploy active countermeasures. Like
You have to put up a fence. And something that I'm profoundly interested in, I spend a lot of time reading, is the connection laterally between different types of artistry. So like the way that I'm reading Susan Sontag on photography right now, and I'm sure you love that. And there's so many good books like that. I actually don't read books about music creativity so much, maybe about music history. Like I read a book about Rick Rubin in the studio, but I love other types of books about writing. And I'm curious, just from a standpoint of if I'm in the studio and I'm writing music and I can think of that, do you have that same thing come in the comparison with photography? And I mean, at this point, is that something that comes in, or do you also have to meditate out of it at this point?
I'm photographically, I think well, this touches on a point you made earlier, mastery. So photographically, I feel very comfortable. It's not my primary area of focus as it was for 20 years. And it was because I achieved mastery in photography. And if you wonder if you've mastered something yet, the answer is you haven't. If you've mastered something and you know the material front, back, left, the way I like to think about it is that you know how to you don't know everything, but you know how to navigate the entire, say, world of photography.
Mm-hmm.
Where I still have a lot of that doubt and comparo is in the areas that are new to me. I wrote a book in September called Creative Calling and put that book out there. And, my reluctant comparison to all the other friends of ours that have written books and other books on creativity, and there's so many legends out there, I was hyper aware of the comparison there. So to me, it wasn't so much in the area that I had mastered, although certainly that was a part of my trajectory as a photographer. But now these new areas that I'm going into, writing and entrepreneurship and, building things for other creators that are in our community, definitely this is it's a very active process. It's part of what I think turned me toward meditation, mindfulness. Yeah, I don't know. What about you with music? Is it similar, or?
I don't know I feel like music I would say that I've mastered certain parts of it, but the more I go in, the more I realize that I haven't mastered. And I don't know if that's because music is it's so vast, and I could say, well, I've mastered Ableton. I would say that if anything, the tool, like I'm a master of using this particular tool. But right now I'm learning music composition, or I could then just go pick up the guitar and start at at day one again. So, but I will say that something that does happen over time is it's how do I say this? I don't doubt my ability to express myself, and when I realize that actually the whole point is really just to express yourself and not to enter into the comparison stream, the best music is someone's just telling a story, and leaning on that is really the magic. And it's not about there's no one-upmanship. There's something that's more of a deeper connection with the process. So in that way, when I lean on that, everything makes sense and it's easy.
You said something a second ago that I'm checking at the comments right now. The most popular restatement is this idea you said a moment ago. The idea, the creative gap, Ira Glass's creative gap, right? Where you are and where you want to be, the music that you hear in your head or the photograph that you see in your mind, and then being able to make that photograph. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of a gap there. And I think you said that frustration is fuel. And I think that is a very potent, and it hangs in a really interesting balance with not wanting to compare yourself, but acknowledging that there is a gap and that your goal as a creator is to close the gap. And to me, why I brought this up now is you just like slammed this exclamation point at the end, which at the end of the day, the goal is really to be able to express yourself. So the creative gap is not the gap between you and someone else, but it's between you and what it is that you want to say.
100%. That's you nailed it.
So, but no, this is like, I got to give some credit here to Simon Says or Simon Sees on Instagram. But okay, so if we accept that as true just for the moment, what is it that you want to say right now? What stories are you telling with your music? Or if you could say it in words, what are you chasing right now? What kind of narrative?
I think words are hilariously bad at being able to talk about music, but there's some metaphor like talking about music, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. I love that.
That's amazing.
But I will say that there is a causal relationship between the place that music is performed and then the music creation process. And the fact that there are no active music venues in the United States right now, there are no festivals, is fascinating. One of my favorite books, David Byrne's How Music Works, he talks about this a lot, where when he was making, in the very early days before Talking Heads, they're making punk rock and it sounded like CBGB. It's just like the gritty old fucked up speakers. You could hear it in the music and there's a connection there. And I think the same thing goes for all this music that we make. And although I thought about it, I hadn't really felt it until poof, everything, pandemic changes everything. And at some point it will all come back online in a different incarnation. I don't think we're going back to where it was, but there will be concerts again, there will be festivals, they're going to look different. But right now, my music has become more reflective of an internal state because we are spending so much time in those internal states. I'm spending a lot more time in our home studios. In fact, Glitch Mob had a studio for the past couple of years that we moved out of, and we're doing everything remote for the first time ever, which has actually been a really fun experiment because we're writing an album over Dropbox and Zoom, even though we had the studio right down the street. So this is going to profoundly affect the music. And I think that the best music it's a pure, authentic expression of the moment. And especially with what's happening right now, I think that there's fear, there's uncertainty, there's a lot of discipline. I know a lot of people that use music as therapy. And for myself, the music process, when I'm sitting down there in the studio for 2 or 3 hours working, that is my therapy. That's how it's like going to the gym or meditating or something. So the music that you're going to end up hearing from this whole process, I think in the next 6 months to a year, is going to be an artistic reflection of the feeling of everything that's happening. And you have music that is much more specifically about the moment. Like Run the Jewels, one of my favorite acts, their last album, it feels like a protest. You listen to it and I'm just like, wow, I'm there. And I've gone more internal. Um, but Glitch Mob has some music we are working on right now that was um, was from before everything happened. So it's been really interesting to take it through this whole process and and watch how something, even though it wasn't created in this particular moment, that it's almost like when you hear music that you made at a certain point in time, even though it was only a couple months ago, I'm taken back to that memory hall as to what it felt like when we were making that. And it's like, oh wow, things can change so rapidly in a month.
So then music, I noticed on Twitter on July 10th, you announced some new music. So that music, um, the remix from the Ghost of Shima,
Oh yeah,
Tsushima.
Ghost of Tsushima, yeah.
Um, how long ago was that created?
That was a couple months ago,
Yeah.
earlier on this year. And that was actually really fun because we had the soundtrack for this incredible game, and it felt like pure escapism. Like we were given all of these instruments, the soundtrack is super cool for this game. Um, and I just was putting myself in feudal Japan. There's samurais and swords, and in that way, it was much more of a specific exercise of painting a
Right.
cinematic picture. So that way, it's like, oh yeah, samurai, let's go, we can do this. But when I'm sitting down in front of a blank canvas, everything's it's a different process to figure out what we want to say in that particular day.
Fair enough. Ash Jensen is thanking you. This conversation, she says, is such a breath of fresh air. We got Guyana in the house, South Africa, London, New York, Brooklyn. The world says hello and is very
Hello,
grateful
world.
for your POV on creativity. A
Mm.
lot of gratitude around identifying the evil that comparison creates. Now, let's. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that just for a second because I feel like there's an open loop there that I'd like to close. You talked about conditioning almost, like going to the gym, and the muscle was a word that you used around how to stay focused and ignore not just comparison but other musicians. I'm paraphrasing what you said,
Mhm.
and hold me to task if I'm getting it wrong. But how do you develop that muscle?
Um, Repetition, just like just like going to the gym. I think discipline is so important with this, and especially right now, I feel like there's always some news. There's some bad news that's going to come up today, and I mean, I'm not sure if people are familiar with the term doom scrolling.
Yeah.
People, there's all sorts of bad news. Like that's going to continue and that's not going to stop. So I think that your muscle has to even be a little bit stronger right now. But at the same time, there's a, it's not the same flavor of discipline that I need to just go to the gym. At the gym, it's like all you have to do. I go to a gym here in Los Angeles where it's like similar to functional fitness, CrossFit style class where you just show up. And I don't have to, it's like a car wash. I just get there at 8 a.m. and then I'm done at 9. It's not like that. You don't just have to show up. I also do think that there are other things to bring the muse to the table to be able to actually create. It's not as simple as just that. But I think that it's the falling in love with the process and not being goal oriented in the sense of, okay, I need to make this one particular thing. I'm going to focus on that. It's actually just the process itself, and being present with that is when the magic happens. Because again, back to the comparison thing, I think it's so easy to get fixated on something that we want to do. But I will say that maybe 80% of the time, the really magical moments in all of the music that I've made, and specifically in Glitch Mob, were happy accidents. It was stuff that we were just messing around and someone hit a note, and we're like, wait a second, what was that? Just grab that, because we were sitting there for hours just playing and messing, and we weren't thinking, we're going to make a song that sounds like this. In fact, the biggest song on our 2014 album, Can't Kill Us, was the one that we made it at the very last minute. We were like, okay, the album's good. I don't just like need something else. And we were like, maybe we'll add something with the guitar. And because it was so playful, we were just messing around. We had this particular guitar patch we wanted to use, this distortion, and it ended up turning into what was, the most listened to song on that album. But it wouldn't have happened if we had calculated every song that needed to be heard exactly before it had a chance to say what it wanted to say.
That was an amazing album. Like, the sophomore albums are always so hard. Especially after you bring an audience along with you, as you guys did so well in 2010. And I thought that was a remarkable album. And
thanks.
Well, yeah. Well, let me hear a little bit more about that. That's a beautiful insight that the play is really what contributed that breakthrough song. What is someone facing when they staring down the idea of a sophomore movie, product, album? Was there any particular psychology that you guys had around that?
The sophomore album it's fascinating why it's classically such a difficult thing, because I think you get back into needing to top yourself or make something that was so grandiose. And that second album, Love, Death, and Mortality, was a way for us to try something new. And also we've done something pretty different each time in Glitch Mob, where the albums don't feel like they're from the same exact thread. There's some artists make albums that have much finer tunes in between each one, finer turns. This one was like, it still sounds like us, but it was really a different movie altogether. Also, if you think of them in terms of movies, maybe they're part of it was almost a different series just in general. So I think that the play thing is really interesting because you can hear, listening back now, we were just having so much fun writing that. And we were very much thinking of it as a live album, whereas Drink the Sea was an introspective album. It was really meant to be heard on headphones. We were spending time in the desert when we were writing, and we were all going through all three of us had a really difficult moment in life. So that album was more of like a diary, whereas Love, Death, and Mortality, you can, as I was talking about before, you can hear the liveness, you can hear the stage in the music, and it was so fun. Electronic music was at it was a cool time around 2013 and 2014, and it hadn't become the big ever-present thing that it is now, although it was starting to. But I think something that you said just got me thinking about the power of play. I have actually my music teacher, if you're listening, Valente, thank you for this metaphor. He has these incredible metaphors, and one of them we were talking about the other day, and actually in one of my own problems in writing and learning, is the idea that in your head you have a little kid with paints, and then you have an editor with a clipboard, and you don't really want them in the room at the same time. Yes. Context switching. If the editor comes in while the kid is there painting, you can halt. So, and that's something that I do. And in fact, now that I'm learning this like deeper music theory, my editor comes in and wants to change things before it's even been released. So my practice right now is to just play, have fun, be in the moment, and not really worry about it. Write drunk, edit sober. That whole thing.
That's great. Write drunk, edit sober. I'm typing that right now. Note to self.
Yes, I think that's Hemingway.
It's so damn inspiring, Justin, to hear you talk about. I mean, you've got, you have songs on the charts, and you are talking about your music teacher. Like, that is this profound. And I remember the first time we met, thinking like you were asking the most thoughtful questions of, anyone that I'd spoken with, and of course over the course of the weekend that we were out there together, and just so thoughtful and curious, and how much of that is natural for you or cultivated?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I've thought about that before, but I have always been naturally curious, but I think that for me, my habit of reading has kept me um, more curious. I grew up, my grandmother owned a bookstore, a little bookstore in the East Bay called Orinda Books, and I would work in the children's books aisle, and I would recommend different children's books. So I was around books all growing up, and I think that having a lifelong reading habit has somehow helped me with the fact that, and I was always told that I could read whatever I want. And as long as I was reading, my grandparents said, "Great," and they knew something. So I think for me, even now, reading is a way for me to keep the curiosity muscle alive and apply that to everything, because really that's really the magic of all of this stuff for me, is just learning. And that's also the reason why yeah, I'm fascinated. I love this. I mean, you've created this whole world around the idea of taking creativity and nuggets from different people and then seeing how they can apply to other practices. And you had Seth Godin on your show, and he's one of my favorites because he's a marketing guy, but it doesn't matter. He's not really talking about marketing. Like you can take those little bits, his daily blog post, and apply it to anything. He wouldn't call himself this, but I think of him almost as like a spiritual guide in a certain way, a creative spiritual guide.
It's so true. And like the best marketing in a way is this sort of reliance on your own authenticity, the part of you that is the weird, James Victory, the artist, is also well known for saying, what made you weird as a kid will make you great today. And how do we double down on that and lean into that? And Seth is so good at just like, Purple Cow, and you think about all his books, and what a genius and a sweetheart at the same time.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly it. You're right. It's about, I had never thought about what I liked about him so much, but it's that he's constantly pushing your authenticity button, because that's really, and I think for everything we do in music, but anything really, like, how do you get through the overthinking and get to the authentic thing that you actually need to say? That's it.
Yeah, I had the good fortune. He read an early draft of my book and gave me feedback. It was like the best feedback.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, like talk about, getting a lesson in writing a book. It was just such a laser and I just look back at like, what would the book be like if he hadn't have, helped me think clearly about it.
Wow.
Yeah. Dude's a legend. All right. I want to shift gears here, and I know a story about you secondhand, about being fired from a job early on in your career, and maybe it was let go. Maybe fired is too strong. I don't know the particulars. Would you have made the leap to your aspiration on being a full-time musician, or did you need that nudge or kick or push? Because there's a lot of people right now who are looking for an excuse, looking for a reason, and I'm wondering if you needed that, or if today you feel like you'd be strong enough to take the leap without the nudge that you got at some point in your past. Wondering if you could recount the story and a little context around it.
Absolutely, yeah. I was working in San Francisco right around the time that Glitch Mob was turning from a hobby and it was just starting to take on a life of its own. And the bandmates Ed and Josh lived in Los Angeles, and I was working 5 days a week, and then I would come home and go to the studio at night, and then Friday and Saturday, Sunday, I would fly out and play some shows. And when the company folded and I got laid off, that was a huge light bulb went off. Memory is so fallible; it's hard to say. But in that moment, I I remember loving my comfortable place in San Francisco. My family's from there, and it was leaving this zone of comfortability and saying, you know what, I am going to come to Los Angeles. I'm going to move down and just figure it out. I moved down to Ed's house and I stayed in his room. He had extra room there for a month. Um, I don't know if I would have done that if I didn't have that nudge. I really don't, because I never thought I was going to be a professional, whatever that means. I don't even a musician, or at least like that's what I did with most of my time. I went to school. I have a degree in film, and I thought I wanted to go. I was learning post production. And I still love After Effects and Cinema 4D and stuff like that. But I was like, I get to sit in my studio and make visuals and edit, and learning Final Cut Pro and all of that. And then I just fell in love with making the music for the films way more than actually editing them. But I never set out like, I'm gonna go and do this. I wish I could say that I knew from an early age that I was gonna travel around the world. No, it wasn't actually until that was my late 20s. I'm in my late 30s now, so this was like pretty late in what people would consider this whole artistic path. That there's this. I mean, some people just catch a lightning bolt and all of a sudden at age 21 everything works out. But I know so many people that it didn't actually happen until much later in time. So yeah. For me, the tables turning like that was really what I needed to then just take the jump and say, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and trust this.
Trust. I think that is a huge aspect of the creative process, or maybe even life process. Speaking of process, I want to talk a little bit more about your creative process. You've already cited like the ability to have fun and to sit down in the studio and write drunk, edit sober. Anything else key to your process? Are you a morning creator, an evening creator? And again, I'm not really looking for tips and hacks kind of a guy, but just hearing a little bit about how individual creators create. It was always, I read a lot, as you have said the word books probably 10 times already in our conversation, as a huge source of inspiration for you. The same is true for me. I read a lot of biographies and I found it interesting, the wide range, and it helped me understand that basically what Warhol does and Basquiat does and David Bowie did, or Linda Ronstadt, like the range of what's possible for a creative process is unlimited, but it helped me feel okay to read about that. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, what can you talk about your creative process in a way that helps us see into it?
Absolutely. I used to be a nighttime creator. I was a night owl for most of my life, and I've switched to being a morning person, which is really interesting because I thought that the magic really only happened after midnight. But later in time, what I realized, it was more that there's a feeling that society had gone to sleep and I was now alone. There's no text coming in, or even just this sense that like, okay, I'm off in my studio right now. But a couple years ago, I started experimenting with morning work. And at first it was really strange because normally I would be up. I would work till 4 or 5 in the morning sometimes. And that's just when the magic would happen, and sleep till noon, get up and do it again. But what I realized for me now that I started working in the morning is that it was more about the momentum of knowing that for me at the same time every day, roughly, I'm going to get into the studio and do the thing. So creative momentum, I cannot overstate how impactful that is for me, even if it's an hour or 2 hours. I like a chunk of 2 hours, but even an hour, honestly, even 30 minutes, I've been able to get a lot done. In fact, my ambient project Superposition, Matt, my collaborator, when we wrote that album in 2018 and 2019, we only had, just because of our schedules and other work engagements, we only really had an hour or 2 in the morning. We wrote the whole album over the course of pretty much hour chunks, like 3 or 4 days a week. He would come over, we'd have a coffee, hyper focus for an hour, and then it's funny because we were making chill ambient music. But we every now and again we would get together on a Saturday and work, but it was really those little bits. So for me, there's something about, so if I have 5 days in a row where I'm working at the same time every day, it is so much better than, even if it's just an hour, than say like Monday, Thursday, Sunday, full days. It's a completely different thing.
Wow. Wow. So I would like to read a little. I don't think you know this, but I cited you in my book, and I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs from the book, and I want you to respond to it. This particular section
I didn't know that.
This particular section is about tracking time and schedules, and I think I wasn't planning on doing this, but when you started talking about how the schedule created momentum, and momentum is so valuable, I just pulled it up here. Clocks can be useful in other ways as well. Justin Beretta of the electronic music trio The Glitch Mob turned me on to the Pomodoro Technique, invented by the Italian academic Francesco Cirillo in the late 80s. It's a brutish but effective technique to push through creative blocks and keep working on tasks that require extended concentration, like writing or composing music. Set a timer for 25 minutes, work without interruption, and then take a 5-minute break. That's 1 Pomodoro. In Italy, kitchen timers are often shaped like tomatoes, hence the name. Complete 4 Pomodoros and then take a 15-minute break, rinse and repeat. This method first found wide acceptance in academia, but many creators use it as well. Beretta is a certifiable rock star, and he swears by it. If you find yourself easily distracted, try one of the many Pomodoro apps. So thank you, because I was writing, again, I'm a visual artist, mixed media, photography, all that stuff is just, it's so instant and instantaneous. And even if the setup to the thing takes weeks or months, in the moment, I'm just easily focused. Writing was brutal, so brutal for me. And that got me through it. How did you get introduced to it? And clearly you believe in it. I've seen a bunch of tweets on it.
I know, I won't shut up about it. I have to read your book, by the way. Thank you for that.
I'll send you a copy as soon as we're done.
I'm gonna devour that. I don't actually remember where I first heard about it. It might have been Tim Ferriss. But either way, there's something about the fact that, especially right now, there are so many distractions, that saying that for this time, even if it's just for 30 minutes, I mean, now I'm doing 2-hour chunks, where I'm not doing anything else. I'm not going to get up and get some chips. I'm not going to the bathroom. No texting, no emailing, certainly no Twitter, just this. And one of those a day, just even one 30-minute chunk, will be better than 2 distracted hours. I really believe in that. Now, I don't think it it doesn't work for everyone. I have had other people say that it is too regimented for them, but I think everyone's creative process is so particular. But for me, there's something about it. It's just the magic potion. If I can't get through something, I will do a Pomodoro right there. And I also have a timer that is, so I'm not using an app on my phone just to get the phone further away. There's a little like $4 Amazon timer.
Ring.
That's it. And one time I saw Trent Reznor speak, as one of my favorite musicians and composers, and people were asking about how do you get through creative blocks? And actually, he was on stage talking to David Byrne, and
wow, that's a power duo.
Oh my gosh, shit. It was incredible. Oh and there's this idea that he expressed so beautifully, which he said, the good ideas come at random times. He said something like, you have to be there with your antenna up, ready. So even if you do a Pomodoro or whatever, you have 60 minutes and nothing happens, that's okay, because it might be in that last 1 minute where you finally just get one sentence out that's good, and that can actually be the thing. So that's the thing I think another people, including myself, can get caught up on, is that every time you sit down to create, you have to move the needle. But I think just even if you just one little thing is just enough, as long as it is as you are sitting there and going through the practice and doing it.
Well, the momentum concept, like clearly that manifests momentum. If you get one sentence is 100% more than you had in the previous minute, right? And I think that's, I found it, like, to me, that is not the basis for my creative process. That is if I'm fucked. Like if I'm stuck,
Right.
I'm like, all right, bring out, it's like the nudge that, losing your job created for you to step into, the next chapter. This is just a very micro version of that. A nudge, a constraint that you agree to abide by. And it has a way of focus that it's pretty hard to wiggle out of. I think it's interesting that you don't actually use your phone as the timer. That's a trap probably as well for a lot of people. You pick that thing up.
It is. And I think there's something about, I've noticed, for me, this is a strange one, but if I have my phone near me, it is very different than if I take my phone and I put it in a different room, because I feel like at this point, especially when traveling, I've spent so much time on my phone that my brain is cybernetically connected to it through the ether. So if I put it away, it's a lot easier to focus. But if it's sitting there looking at me, even if I'm not touching it, it's it's kind of begging for. Where'd it go?
I can see you.
Did I get some likes? Some likes.
Speaking of that, I think that's a beautiful setup about attention and attention, meditation, mindfulness. If mindfulness is the directing attention, your collaboration with folks like Ram Dass and Alan Watts, first of all, incredible. Second, my wife is a meditation and mindfulness teacher, and studied with Baba Ram Dass. And when you released the vinyl, that was a present that I bought.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. I meant to reach out to you and have you send me a signed one. So I'll get you a book. You get me a signed version of that that vinyl.
You got it.
But what a beautiful project. And so I'm curious. Clearly, there was a reason for wanting both to, create the music and to collaborate with Ram Dass. And I'm wondering if you can just start to open this chapter of the conversation for us around why Ram Dass, Alan Watts, your collaborations with them, what attention means, the mind and the mindset has played, the role that those things have played in your journey.
Oh wow, I'm really touched that you bought that vinyl for your wife. That's so cool, and thank you for doing that. That supports the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation and the whole project of keeping that going. Because ultimately, for me, it's about, that particular project is about creating rabbit holes back down to these teachings that were really impactful for me. So, yeah, I had encountered Ram Dass's books at a point in time when it didn't actually make sense to me. So, but I kept them around. I was like, a lot of people I know love these, but it didn't connect. I was like, I don't know, he's talking about God and like mystical what? I just didn't get it. It was the meat and potatoes mindfulness that really got me first. I would say meat and potatoes, like TM. It's just 20 minutes a day. Sorry, 20 minutes at a time, twice a day. So, but at some point in time, later on, the Ram Dass really clicked for me. The teachings really, I was like, oh, I get it. And I wanted to create something to use music as a way to spread it to the world. And it's one of those things that, and I love to hear these stories because it's certainly not for everybody, but if you connect with it, if you get it, it's a really cool thing because there's nothing else out there like it. And when we were touring around in 2018, the Glitch Mob we would do these huge meet and greets, 50, 70 people. Sometimes there was only 5, but sometimes they were really big. And every now and again, maybe like one out of every, 5 to 10 shows, someone would come up with a Ram Dass vinyl and say, hey, like this thing got me meditating. And for me, that was really the whole point, is that music is just a way back down to this stuff. And it was the same thing with Alan Watts. It was not only is he someone that his books really meant a lot to me, and I still read them all the time right now, but he's such an incredible orator. I mean, his voice and
Oh my God, yeah.
his command of the language is really incredible. I mean, it was really a dream to work with and to get to become friends with his son Mark, and also the Ram Dass Foundation. So through this, we started this project of pairing. And up until now, it's only been myself in superposition, but we're starting the project of bringing in other artists to do this, because the idea is really that the guided meditations on their own, they occupy a very particular space, and with a little bit of music, I think of it as adornment. I don't want the music to feel overpowering. I don't like it when there's strings playing over a meditation and someone is telling you what to feel. It's more that it's like just a place, like we're setting it in a frame. And we've started sending some meditations to other electronic musicians, and it's been really exciting for them to just basically get to hang sonic bits on top of it to really give you something else to listen to. So I think of it for there's a lot of meditation teachers that would say music. Oh no, like that's
TM.
No music. And I do get that. I mean, I've spent a lot of time meditating. I do think that ultimately, if I was when I'm doing guided meditations, they don't always have music, but think of it like if you want your pet, you want a dog to take a pill and you like put it inside of peanut butter. It's kind of like that. It's just it tastes good, and it's a way to get it down the pipes. So that was really the goal of the whole project, and we're launching a label around this to be able to connect the dots and ultimately have other artists and creators find that thing that's really meaningful to them, and then add their touch to it and create those touch points to create more rabbit holes back down to the stuff.
If there's anything I can do to help or share or promote, I'm a huge advocate. I think the sugar with the medicine or the pill with the peanut butter, I'm starting to realize that this mindfulness, if the most the thing that we have, if we have anything, using the word thing lightly, if we have anything in this world, we have our attention, right? Because just like whatever you're focusing on, that is your reality. If you are the thoughts and emotions that you're feeling, your attention is literally the only thing that you have. And whether you point that towards, things that make you happy or sad, or you're aware of the itch that you have on your foot, or how you're making someone else feel. Like at the end of the day, I'm starting to wonder if all of this for me is like, it's not an accident. We talked about all the creative process, and we're talking about, mindfulness and attention and Ram Dass, and, at the end of our conversation here, like this is the pill, this is the Trojan horse. And I find it almost accidental, but I can't not keep going there, because at the end of the day, if all you have is your attention, why not, choose where you place it, choose very, very wisely.
Yes.
I didn't know you were a TMer. For those of you who, you've been listening to the show at all, I basically talk about TM every, 3 or 4 episodes. Most of my guests have done it. Tim Ferriss talks about me beating him over the head with it. Me and right. Rick Rubin finally getting him to turn to TM. Can you talk to me about your experience finding it, and you still practice, benefits, drawbacks?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, all of the esoteric woo-woo spirituality just didn't work for me in the beginning, although I got more woo-woo later in time. TM, when I have a friend that was working on a campaign raising money with the David Lynch Foundation, and they were bringing meditation to schools, and so they got to bring in some friends, so I got to go for the weekend. And there was something about the investment in the time of really learning this, but more than that, it was the prescription of, it is this 20 minutes. I mean, it's the same thing as Pomodoro creating to it. It's the exact same thing, where I thought, okay, there's a mindful momentum there. If I'm just going to do this 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening, I'm going to try it for a week and see how I feel. And after a week, I was
Isn't it bonkers?
bonkers.
It
And
is.
yes,
It's bonkers. The control that you have over
yes.
your attention and your, I don't know. Sorry, I'm interrupting you just because
No, that's it.
it's so profound.
I could talk to you about this for 5 hours because I'm so fascinated by the overlap of mindfulness and creativity and the way that I think it's the same thing that we're talking about when you're in the studio or when you're creating and you need to focus and not let the distraction break the attention. There really is nothing that's a better training specifically for creating than meditation that I have found. It's almost like when people are training for a long run and they'll go high up to a high altitude to sort of get their lungs used to it and then come back down again. So for me, it's very lateral, but also, I mean, yes, there's a lot of ways to apply meditation to productivity as a productivity tactic, but ultimately the attention thing, as you said, zooming out is really just that's what you have. It's your only thing. Creativity is one of those things, but it also helps my relationships in my life and communication with loved ones and just navigating through life in general, especially for me, the TM gave me what I felt like was a very firm grounding. Like I felt like my mindfulness container was strong when I first went to a 10-day silent retreat. And once I had that foundation there, then going into loving kindness meditation and bringing compassion into that container, that was the magic pow for me was going deeper. But for anyone that is struggling getting into meditation, TM for me was 100% the ramp into it.
I absolutely share that sentiment, and I had experienced a lot. My original was acquaintance with. I'll say it started out as visualization in sports. I went to college on a soccer scholarship and played at the an Olympic development team, and there we had access to that. This was a long time ago. I'm 100 years old, but it was so like brutally effective. Like I was like, oh, what is this shit? This is like powerful medicine. And it went away as I stepped away from that competitive side of things. And then I also tried 4 or 5 different things, and they all were, I just didn't feel like there was enough simplicity and or structure. It was like I had to hop on one leg and then ring a bell and just go do all kinds of shit. And this was just so brutally simple. It's 20 minutes. You are given a mantra. You say that mantra. When your attention wanders, you bring it back to the mantra. End of story. Like nothing else. That is it. And the process of like you said, I had tried so many other things, and this thing worked. Mm-hmm. And I began actively prescribing it. I shared the story with Tim, and he said the same thing. He's like, we were hanging out, and he said, like, dude, you seem like you got your shit together. Like, what's happening? And I was like, this is gonna be weird, man. But and I think he was, well, I won't share what he was thinking about at the time, but, and he was like, fine. And it's a little bit, there's in order to sort of get your mantra, you need to go to the tm.org and pay a fee, and that turns a lot of people off. And I remember Tim was incessantly like, dude, come on. I'm like, yeah. I will pay for it for you. Like, right. Do not let that block you.
That's right.
And so to hear that the structure was powerful, the simplicity and the structure was powerful for you, I would just invite folks. I don't care if it's TM. I just think TM is, as you said, a great on-ramp. I love that. I'm going to use that forevermore. Can you describe for me, this maybe just, it'll roll off your tongue, or maybe it's difficult, but describe the difference in your day-to-day, I will call it stature, before and let's say after. You said a week. I'm going to say 6 months after TM. Like, how did your brain function differently for the folks at home who are trying to understand why so many of the people that are top performers have a meditation practice? I'm trying to paint a picture.
Mm-hmm. I think that the main thing that I realized was that I was constantly lost in thought before I was meditating. It was almost like I was confused.